Gosh darn it, what am I going to write about? I've been talking about nothing but family so far this whole season. I've covered almost every base that I could think of over and over again. How much more can I possibly add to it? These were the questions I wrestled with a lot while pondering upon this episode, until Shady Oak Ministries pointed out to me that the lesson of the episode, surprisingly, was actually not about family. Much like the dynamic that Twilight had with Celestia in the earlier seasons of the show, Starlight is now in a similar situation with Twilight. Although I talked about what that implies when I covered Celestial advice, we are now seeing it in practice, as well as some of the problems that come along with it. Up until the start of Season 7, Twilight had been teaching Starlight about friendship using theory and controlled experimentation, the methods that she herself was most familiar with. But theory only goes so far, and Starlight graduated when there wasn't anything else to cover in theory. But that left both of them uncertain of how Starlight would perform without guidance. The difference is that when Celestia sent Twilight into her journeyman phase, it was masked in a way that Twilight was more familiar with and could jump into with a lot more confidence. But it still was a matter of practical, first-hand experience type learning, which promotes both better understanding and problem-solving skills within the field. The lack of proper training mixed with Twilight's reluctance resulted in a Starlight who was unconfident in her methods that she needed to take. Then, by extension, she was untactful. This is not a good combination for trying to resolve a familial issue where contempt and tension is high. And then, when the situation inevitably quickly got out of hand, Starlight was forced to act on unrefined instinct. The idea behind Starlight's spell was to force the Royal Sisters into each other's shoes for a day, thus creating understanding for each other's roles and talents as well as empathy for each other's struggles. We should all know by now that it is very difficult for contempt to exist in the domain of understanding and empathy. So, Starlight's method worked. But not before Starlight had to wrestle with her own methods. Between uncertainty, the high-stakes pressure that Twilight had given her, and her own history of solving problems with brainwashing magic that she is trying to correct, I am not at all surprised that she was having anxiety-induced nightmares. From this, we should take away the importance of finding a balance in how we deal with interpersonal problems. I often hear people advise others to trust your gut. But I have personally noticed that this mostly applies to avoiding conflict in the first place. Usually, getting out of conflict requires a much higher degree of tactfulness. So, while your gut can help you avoid a problem solving on impulses often results in disaster. But, because I don't think that many of those listening often find themselves mediating between princesses with supernatural powers, let's imagine a parallel but more realistic situation. Such as a friend who has trouble making ends meet. You've got the means to help them, so you might provide the difference without thinking. But then what you gave them was spent irresponsibly. Maybe this wasn't even the first time they've ended up in this situation for similar reasons. Now, the only thing that's changed is that the bad habits have been reinforced and you are out of resources that could have been used productively. Or, how about when you come to the aid of a friend who is being antagonized and respond harshly as a preventative measure? But this was only the beginning of a conflict that likely could have been solved through either ignoring it or through communication. Now, you're in trouble as well for failing to de-escalate peacefully. Sometimes, it also turns out that the line between bully and victim is kind of blurry. Heck, we could probably simplify this whole allegory to something along the lines of anytime someone confides a problem into you and you immediately enact the first solution that comes into your mind when there were other factors to be considered. Your instincts can help you avoid a lot of problems, but that should be used in conjunction with reasoning to find the proper solutions when conflict inevitably arises anyway. So, what could Starlight have done if the problem had already escalated to people yelling at each other without sympathy? Well, I see two potential solutions. One being to approach the situation completely differently in the first place. Instead of telling Celestia and Luna of their problem at the same time, I would have done more observation and used conversation to bring the sisters to an understanding of each other separately. and then I would have brought them together to talk it out. Alternatively, since the shouting match had already begun, I might have just let it play out, and only intervened if it had turned violent or went on for too long. At a certain point, most people are going to separate themselves. That's when you allow each of them to vent their frustrations and counsel them on understanding and empathy separately. It's unfortunate, but sometimes people just need to get the anger out of their system before they can move on to actually solving the problem. The answer, as always, is communication. We all have the opportunity to be both teachers and students in our everyday lives, especially as problems like this arise, as they do for everyone. But it starts with the understanding that everyone you're having these problems with is a person that is susceptible to these pitfalls just like you, regardless of status or stature. Starlight never quite had a problem with this concept. She's always had an impulsive nature. Now that she's separated from Twilight's direct guidance, she's going to be working on refining her instincts on her own. Then, she won't have as great of a risk of having the same communication problems as the Royal Sisters were having. If we choose to take the time to closely examine our interpersonal problems through the lens of empathy and move forward with both tact and confidence once our methods are decided upon, then we can do the same. And that's the moral of the story. If you have any comments, critiques, or suggestions, you can send me a message by following BrawnyBuck on Tumblr or sending an email to bronydebates@gmail.com. This video was supported by all of my generous supporters on Patreon. Please check out their content links in the description. You can also see how you can join them in supporting my channel and what you would get in return. Have a great day, and I look forward to hearing from all of you soon.